Welcome everybody. My name is Celia Davis and I'm the Senior Projects and Policy Manager at the Town and Country Planning Association, and I am chairing this lunchtime's webinar session. The Town and Country Planning Association is a charity and we work to inspire people to create healthy, sustainable and resilient places. And we have been working with the Environment Agency under our Planning for Climate Change work stream for a few years now, particularly looking at engaging and training planning and flood risk professionals and stakeholders in how they can use national policy on flood risk to support flood resilience through the planning system. So this webinar falls under a package of work that we've been doing recently around coastal planning, and really it's really a really important session because coastal planning and management of the coast is such an important part of climate change adaptation for our coastal communities, some of whom are the most vulnerable communities in England to the impacts of climate change. And the planning presents a really vital and essential tool for local government to manage and support climate adaptation for the long term. So within that context, the session today is aimed to be quite introductory. It will give you a really helpful overview of some of the key information and tools available to you as local councillors in coastal authorities, how you can use those in planning, including shoreline management plans and the recent update to national coastal erosion risk mapping. We have also, alongside today's session, been running sessions for planning professionals working in local government. We had a session yesterday and we have a more detailed session on tools that a more detailed sort of technical session for planners tomorrow. So if you want to share that with your colleagues in your planning teams, please do go ahead. Before I move on to run through the agenda, just some housekeeping items. We are recording the session today. The aim is that we can make this available through YouTube so that if you have other elected members that your council that you feel would benefit from this session, people can catch up on the content later. We will be collecting questions and answers through the session, and we're using a function called Slido, and I will shortly hand over to Eleanor, who will run you through the details of how to access that. And we will also be sharing the slides from the session with everyone that has registered to participate after the session this lunchtime. So if we move to the next slide, please. We have a really great agenda of speakers from the Environment Agency and colleagues. We will have an introduction from Nick Hardman, who's a Principal Advisor in the Coastal Flood and Erosion Risk Management team at the Environment Agency, to give a strategic overview. Rachel Clark-Wood, who is Senior Advisor in the Coastal Resilience team, will give us an introduction to SMPs and later talk through some of the information that is available to you in local government. And Stuart Rowe, who is the Chair of the Coastal Group Network, will be giving reflections from a practical user experience perspective. We then should have plenty of time for question and answers, which you can submit throughout the session through Slido. So without further ado, I shall hand over to Eleanor, who's going to kick us off, get you practicing the use of Slido with a poll. Thanks, Eleanor.
That's great, Celia. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So if you don't know me, I'm Eleanor Blundell. I work for the Environment Agency and I'm in our coastal resilience team. And you'll be hearing from some of the people in our team as we move forward. Yes, we are taking questions on Slido. You may have used this before. We use it quite a lot in terms of our coastal resilience work. For those who may not be a massive fan of it, we're using it because it just helps us gather everything in one place. We've used it throughout development of the National Coastal Erosion Risk Map, and we've got all that information and all those questions that people have asked us along the way. So it's really great for us. So apologies if it's not your cup of tea, but hopefully we can get some questions on there later. So in order to access Slido, if you're at your computer, if you have a phone or a tablet or however you access the internet, if you go to www.slido.com and you pop in TCPA2 in the little box, when you go on that page, it will take you to our Slido. I can see that we've at least got one person on there at the moment, which is great. So at the moment, when you go on there and input that code, you will see two little tabs at the top. One is the Q&A, where you can pop any questions that you've got. We'll be keeping an eye on those as we go through the session, and we'll come to answer some of those questions later on. And at the moment, we've also got a little poll open. So if you just flip to the next slide, we're just asking you at the beginning, there'll be a little poll at the end, which is slightly different as well, but we're just asking you now, partly so you get a bit used to using Slido, but also just for our awareness in terms of whether you have heard of Shoreline Management Plans, SMPs, and the National Coastal Erosion Risk Map, so NCERM. And I can see we've got a few people voting in there, which is great. Helps us understand a little bit more about who we're talking to, and the kind of information that we'll be giving you as we go along as well. So I'll keep that poll open for a bit. So if you've not quite got on Slido, you can go and pop your vote in there over the next few minutes, and don't forget to pop any questions as we go through into the Q&A section as well, and we will get round to some of those later on in the webinar. That's it from me. You'll hear from me at the end, just as we do another quick poll at the end. But for now, I'll pass on to Nick Hardiman, who will cover some of the strategic side of things.
Thank you, Eleanor. Thanks very much for that. Good afternoon. My name is Nick Hardiman. I'm in the same team as Eleanor in the strategic overview team in the FCRM Directorate at the Environment Agency. In coastal resilience. So we kind of do a lot of the coastal part of that strategic overview role that the Environment Agency took on back in 2008 for all forms of flooding and erosion risk. As you're well aware, we have to work very closely with local authorities, coast protection authorities at the coast, who directly manage coastal erosion risk. And so that forms a lot of what we do and spend our time on, is kind of really getting that partnership working and going, and making sure that we can work most effectively together. If you go on to the next slide, please. Just a little bit more about that coastal overview role. I always think of it as in four main ways in terms of what it actually means. It's partly about the information and evidence that we provide, and we develop new evidence, we commission work to develop that evidence, and we communicate and embed the use of that evidence. And that's a really critical part of that strategic overview role. So a recent example of that is a great big update, systematic, comprehensive update that we've done to our erosion risk mapping and the National Flood Risk Assessment. So National Coastal Erosion Risk Mapping, NCERM, and NAFRA, the National Flood Risk Assessment, two key pieces of information, huge amounts of data behind both, much of it dependent on working with local authorities to get that data and work it into the models that we use to produce the erosion risk and flood risk visuals that you can easily then bring up on screen through the links that you'll get later on from gov.uk. So generating, communicating coastal risk, that's certainly one where everything we want to do is done through evidence, and the next pillar, if you like, of the strategic overview is using that in strategic planning. So we develop with local authorities, with other bodies like Natural England and other DEFRA agencies, but also a range of other partners. Shoreline Management Plans at the coast. Hopefully a number of you will have heard of Shoreline Management Plans. They were actually really initiated by local authorities, stretching as far back as the 1980s in some places. They really came together in popularity and some effort around the 1990s. And MAF, as was, decided that this was a really good idea to actually, rather than just work out what we're going to do at a local authority level, actually join up and see how management approaches and policies in one location might affect other places down the coast through interruption of sediment transport, for example, or what have you. And so shoreline management plans were born in their more current state. We had a first go at them in the 1990s. They tended to say, we'll just carry on doing what we're going to do at the moment. And so DEFRA, as it became, commissioned everybody to do it again and actually consider the impacts and implications of climate change a little bit more thoroughly, and also consider things like broad economic assessments to guide what was likely to be sustainable and affordable on a financial level, but also environmental improvements and how we can get a better coastal environment. And all of that planning then drives our investment, and that's through our main FCRM investment program. But there's lots of things within that as we develop and shape that for the next few years, we're really wanting to bring much more to the fore, and that is nature-based solutions and adaptive approaches to managing coastal risk. And of course, we will still be doing the more traditional approaches in terms of defending and protecting people from erosion and flooding. That is always going to be needed. More of an emphasis on maintaining what we have as well. That's going to be a feature. But those nature-based solutions are really coming to the fore in terms of trying to mainstream them, rather than always be in the world of doing pilots here and trying it there. We need to get better at making sure that those really are a part of how we make the coast not only resilient, but also better for wildlife. We often talk about climate change, and that is hugely important in considering risk. But we also have an ecological crisis, which we need to address across the country, inland and at the coast. And nature-based solutions can help to contribute to rectifying and mitigating that as well. So we have to stay legal in terms of responsibilities under the habitats regulations to compensate for any loss of habitat in designated sites, European sites. And that's part of what drives our habitat creation at the coast. But that restoration agenda is going to be an important part of that investment program going forward as well. And so you've got the evidence, you've got the planning, you've got the investment, and how that is all knitted together is, of course, through partnership working. And I've talked a little bit about that, but coastal groups, which you are probably aware of and at least partly familiar with, are voluntary groups of coming together of the Environment Agency, the local authorities across the region, and also other delivery partners that I've mentioned. Big players at the coast, depending on where you are, those might be a little bit different, but people with a real interest in how the coast is shaped and how those SMPs set out the direction of travel. And it's just worth mentioning just how hard that work is. And it's often, done on a goodwill basis, essentially. These are all voluntary groups. SMPs are not statutory plans. They are done as a matter of policy from DEFRA, and they are given a lot of weight in planning policy as well. But they're not actually statutory, and that's something we might want to consider in terms of making sure that we can have the investment and the backing for coastal groups to input and maintain those SMPs. You'll hear a lot more about those from Rachel Clark-Wood a little bit later as she talks about shoreline management plans and the new erosion risk mapping. Into the next slide, please. I'll just highlight some recent products going back to the evidence bit.
Apologies all, we appear to have lost Nick Hardiman just as he was about to tell us about some really interesting resources. I'm not sure if any of our colleagues would like to step in and take over, Rachel, or if we should move on to the next presentation, and perhaps if Nick can rejoin, we can pick that up.
Yeah, that's fine. I can take over from here, from where Nick left off. So just introduce myself before obviously kicking into taking over. So hi everyone, I'm Rachel Clark-Wood. So in the same team as Eleanor and Nick, I am technical lead for everything SMP world. So you'll hear more about that from me shortly. So where Nick got to, so we've got three new sets of products which you may have heard about or you may have been involved with. So in December last year, we published the report explaining how flood and coastal erosion risk is changing across England and why. That was published mid-December last year. That gave an overview of all the detail around flood and coastal erosion risk before we then went into updating the new products in January this year. So one of those was the check your long-term flood risk and the NCERM detail on SMP Explorer. So check coastal erosion risk for an area in England, which is hosted on SMP Explorer. We updated that and that went live in January this year. Most recently, in March, we published an update to the flood zones and added other new data to a flood map for planning. So step-by-step progress of the updates that we did there. So we had the interim update with the report, giving that overview, and then the actual products and the details with the more in-depth updates in January and March. Next slide, please. These next two slides provide a headline of some of the detail that you may have seen or that you can see in the report that was published. So you can see some of the figures on there for the sources of all flooding in England. So you've got the first detail on there regarding the present day risk of 6.3 million properties, and that is the number of properties that are in areas of risk from flooding from at least one of the sources, if you can see on there, the rivers, the sea and surface water. Previously 5.5 million properties at risk. You see the increase of nearly 1 million on there, and then with climate change added to that, that goes up to 8 million properties that could be in areas at risk of flooding from one of the sources that I've just mentioned there, the rivers, the sea and the surface water, and that is by mid-century, so that takes us up to 2055. Nick, I can see you back on screen. Did you want to take over from me, or are you happy for me to continue?
I can take over if you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rachel, for stepping in there. I was unceremoniously kicked out of Zoom, and I'm not quite sure why, but thank you very much for stepping in, Rachel. Yeah, so Rachel will have covered that last slide in terms of the products that we've provided recently in terms of coastal risk. And you've got the headlines here in terms of what that's telling us and the big headlines of flooding risk. And the climate change, which is a big addition to both the flooding and erosion risk products that we have. They are increases in our current understanding, and so that's going to be something that we have to consider across the piece on how we actually manage that risk going forwards. If you go on to the next slide, please. That's the flood risk. The next slide covers erosion risk. I haven't seen it move on at my end. There we go, yeah. And we have there the headlines on erosion risk in England. And you can see there 3,500 properties which are in areas at risk of coastal erosion in the period up to the middle of the century. That doesn't mean to say that 3,500 will definitely be lost, but they are within the zone that we expect to be eroded during that time, and of course it may go faster, it may go slower. The key figure below it, 32,800, which is a major jump, is if we don't actually deliver those shoreline management plans. So that just shows you the value of our investment through SMPs. But of course, SMPs are subject to funding. Their delivery is not statutory. It is, as with everywhere, based on risk and based on budget available. And so we have to accept that there is a residual risk that 3,500 figure may be greater depending on that investment picture. Climate change again will increase, even if increase the numbers that are at risk, even if SMPs are delivered. You can see that much larger figure for the period up to the end of the century, which actually brings that kind of potential increase of risk from climate change and accelerated sea level rise, for example, to bear. Okay, thank you very much. If you go on to the next slide, I am going to hand back over to Rachel, thanking you again for stepping in, and apologies for that disruption, who will go into the shoreline management planning element in a little bit more detail. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Nick. Next slide, please. So I'll just give you an overview of SMPs in the whole, and SMP Explorer. I'll integrate that in there, kind of what we've done with SMPs and what we're planning to do. And then I'll cover some of the detail regarding the risk side, which is the NCERM detail. So yeah, as Nick stated, SMPs, Shoreline Management Plans, they aren't statutory documents. These are technical documents that consider how to manage the influence of coastal processes on the natural and human environment. And they focus on how to manage the risk from flooding and coastal risk. They were published between 2006 and 2012, and there are 20 English coastal SMPs. You can see on screen there we've got all 22, so 2 specific to Wales and 2 that cross border with Wales, so 20 that we're looking at. They are mutually owned and were developed in partnership by the environment agencies, local planning authorities and other coastal partners and coastal groups. And they use the local evidence and consultation to identify sustainable management approaches over 3 planning timeframes, or what you may have heard being called epochs. So we've got the short-term, medium-term and long-term time periods that you can see on screen there. Obviously, we're in the medium term now, so epoch 2 that some of you may have heard, which runs from 2025 to 2055. Next slide, please. So just some detail on implementing SMPs. So the EA, local planning authorities and other partners with an interest on the coast use SMPs to inform any management investment decisions, so funding streams, habitat creation and restoration. What you may have heard of is Habitat Compensation Restoration Project, or HCRP, and also use them to inform local plans and development decisions. So anything that goes into a planning application and the decision based on there. And each SMP contains an action plan outlining the short-term actions to actually get the movement and the detail off the ground and ongoing. And if any of the management approaches or policy units that you may have heard them being called, and anything to obviously keep them going, anything if there needs to be identified where the policy or management approach needs to be changed, this will be identified in the action plan. And these actions can range from things such as engagement, monitoring and research, and implementation planning. And you can view all these actions with the SMP on SMP Explorer, which I'll talk about shortly in a moment. There is also the change process regarding how the management approaches need to be changed, and that is on SMP Explorer as well, and the guidance around there. We are working on some of that guidance of the change process just to make that a bit easier and more less detailed and in-depth, and just an easier process to follow. So that is part of the SMP Next Steps project, which I will touch on shortly. Next slide, please. So we've obviously had the SMPs that came about from 2006 to 2012. So SMP2s that some of you may have heard them being called. In 2017, we undertook the SMP refresh project. So this is when the SMP refresh project fully kicked off. And the project was a refresh, as it is stated on the tin there, and not a rewrite of all the SMPs. We wanted to make sure the SMPs were technically reliable and reflected any of the latest evidence since obviously coming to fruition between 2006 and 2012. A lot of the detail that we updated with coastal groups and SMP groups with improving the clarity around the SMP management approaches or policy units. And we did that through the addition of subcategories. So where something may be a hold the line or manage realignment policy and or intent, we introduced a subcategory just to give it a bit more detail and understanding of the approach of that section of the coast. Also improving the accessibility of SMPs, and we did that via the development of the digital tool SMP Explorer. And also, which I touched upon before regarding the action plans, we updated with the coastal groups and SMP groups, the action plans, just again to reflect any of the updates from obviously 2006 to 2012, just to bring that technical reliability into play. Just highlight at the bottom there, the SMP refresh was not about changing the management approaches and wasn't about going out formally reconsulting on the SMPs as a whole to communities and stakeholder groups. It was just a refresh, not a full rewrite, which some of obviously like the local plan so would obviously have a rewrite and not a refresh, but this was just the refresh. Next slide, please. So yes, SMP Explorer. So this was the last part of the refresh project, and it was taking what you can see on screen on the left there. So taking SMP documents, paper documents that were perhaps sat under desks, put on shelves, not touched or hard to view, and turning that all into a digital product, which you can see on the screenshot on the right there, which is the opening screen of SMP Explorer. Everything that you can see on screen on there is what is taken from that box. So everything in the action plan, and if the obviously old documentation, so you can download the previous versions, but everything is digitized, so it's easier to view, just easier to get to and work around rather than having to trawl through a paper document. Next slide, please. Again, just to touch on the SMP Explorer detail as well. Yes, it says on there, this was launched in January last year. This was the last part to SMP refresh project. And then from January this year, we introduced the NCERM, the new risk detail, which I'll go through in a second. The SMP Explorer digital tool is obviously open to the public and everyone because it's on .gov.uk. It makes it more transparent and easier to view that information, just to give the public that detail and help them understand the coastal risk and actions being taken in their area. Next slide, please. And the project that we're currently working on now, so obviously we've done the refresh, we've refreshed everything, we've got everything digitised and on there, so we want to keep that momentum going and actually get SMPs, you know, up front and in front of people again. Obviously we're in the medium-term timeframe now, which is 2025 to 2055 or Epoch 2. So we're now in the SMP Refresh into Action project. This is going to run for the next 2 years, and you can see on screen there some of the aims of the project and what we want to do. So to facilitate some of the priority actions that we put into some of the SMPs during the refresh project, revisit any of the management approaches that potentially need to be changed if we're moving forward, obviously into the medium-term timeframe. And also to improve the access and understanding and the use of SMPs, which is why you're here today and listening and hearing from us regarding everything SMP and NCERM, and obviously the information of where you can find it. So yeah, just improving the communication and tools around that. Next slide, please. So just touch on the risk information. So this is the detail that provides the detail within the SMP. So if you think about the Shoreline Management Plans as that first layer of information, the NCERM, so National Coastal Erosion Risk Map, is some of the risk detail that is actually within there that can help you understand obviously what's going off in your area in the SMP, and also provides that risk information of potentially obviously the management approaches and detail of what potentially needs to change or what is happening within the area. Next slide, please. So these slides will just go through some of the detail around NCERM of what has happened during the project, what NCERM was and what it is now, and the updates to there and where you can find that information. So the previous NCERM, which was published in 2012, this only received minor updates in 2015 and 2017 and was just a basic assessment of property types. The new NCERM, which was published in January this year, this now gives an up-to-date picture of coastal erosion risk for England, and it now includes climate change impacts on coastal erosion. Again, because this is it's a digital tool, it's open to the public on .gov.uk. It is for the use of coastal practitioners, planners and decision makers, but because it is open to the public, it does make it more accessible for the public to view and make it more meaningful for the public to understand and view as well. As I said, this is available and sits alongside the SMP information on SMP Explorer. So you've got the information that sits side by side together in one place. Next slide, please. This is a visual of the previous NCERM and the new NCERM. So as you can see on the left-hand screen there, compared to the right, so the right is the new NCERM detail. It just makes it easy to understand, more visually interactive, and you can see on screen there the detail and the SMP information sitting alongside the coastal erosion information there. Just again, making it more easier to understand, more accessible. And also on the SMP Explorer tool, there's links that sit alongside the coastal erosion risk information on the interactive map. There's also help pages that sit alongside this, so it just gives the full information and the detail and some of the technical detail that sits behind it as well. So it's all the information in one place. Next slide, please. I won't cover too much of this now. I'll do this towards the end just to give you a bit of breathing space on this. But yeah, I'll cover this in a bit more detail. But the thing to highlight on here is the comms and engagement products that we have done and where to find them. So one of the main ones is the obviously SMP Explorer and check coastal erosion risk for an area in England. If you go through that top link there, it will take you to SMP Explorer, entirely up to you which way you go through there. I won't cover the coastal handbook now because that is what I'll be covering shortly regarding the information for yourselves and how it can support you in your role. And I'll cover some of that detail after you've heard from Stuart. But I'll just leave it there for now, let you digest a lot of obviously that information there. Next slide, please. And then I'll just pass to Stuart. So Stuart Rowe is the chair of the Coastal Group Network. So thanks a lot for coming along today, Stuart. And yeah, over to you to provide your experience of everything SMP and NCERM. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rachel. I was just going to open up with this. I've just been to a conference, or you can't quite see it, and I was given a name badge to my surprise, and it's got Stuart Rowe, Coastal Group Network Chair, asked me about shoreline management plans. I thought, oh, crikey, that's great. And here we are again, asking about shoreline management plans. I must say I'm slightly biased. In my working career at North Yorkshire Council, where I'm the coastal manager, I inherited the first generation of SMP plans, which for all intents and purposes were A4 drawings with felt tip pen on, saying this is the erosion, this is a piece of coast, and they weren't exactly user friendly. And then I was project managed our shoreline management plan across the North Yorkshire coastline, and that became much more detailed. It was on nice glossy paper, filed in our filing cabinets in the office, and it came with a CD-ROM as well, which very soon got scratched. And planners would come into my office and take out pages. They would take out the relevant page where they wanted to know what was going to happen, the policy for that particular area, and they wouldn't come back with the pages, and the document slowly degraded. And members of the public, if they were interested in the shoreline management plan, would come into our office and have a look at it. And it's about 500 pages long. I would be trying to find it, going through it. Eventually, we managed to put it online, which helped enormously. And now we come along to this almost a third generation shoreline management plan, which is digitized using the best evidence, and you can interrogate it quite usefully. As an officer now, I can go onto SMP Explorer, elected members or planners will come and say the usual things. What's the policy here? But the new version has got a lot more detail behind it that you can then interrogate a little bit. It's the audit trail. Because if we were all honest with ourselves, back in the olden days on the first versions of the SMP, the decision making's a little bit cloudy, or it's been lost, or it's written down on paper and it's long gone. From the early 90s, we don't have a lot of records as to why we decided what we're going to do. But now we do, and it's a lot more broken down, a lot more detail. So I think from a public perspective, they can interrogate what's going to happen. And I fully expected when the SMP Explorer was launched, we'd be inundated with calls about it. But that didn't really happen, because I think, in all honesty, most people on the coastline are aware of coastal erosion and coastal change now. It's been drip thread through the media and the news and what have you. But we still get those inquiries. So elected members will come to me and say, what's the policy? And I can very quickly now go onto the Explorer and find that information and pass it on. I'm assuming elected members do so themselves, and I assume the public do it, but we're still always going to get those inquiries, and this tool enormously helps with that. It speeds things up. Speed is efficiency. Moving on to the NCERM product, that as a practitioner is fantastic, because it's standardized, it's the best available information that we've got, and we can present that to the planners and elected members who will approach us as practitioners in most cases and say, what's the erosion rate at this location? Or a member of the public will ask, what's happening at my house? It goes right down to the detail. in the early versions of the products that we had, we could never get down to the detail because the detail was almost determined by the width of a felt tip pen on a piece of paper. Now you can drill right down, look at the erosion rate based on best available data. You can look at predictions for the future. What's causing those changes isn't really the issue. It's the issue is we've got to deal with those changes that are happening on the coast. And you can provide that information quite readily. Members of the public and members and my planning colleagues can look at that themselves, but I think they'll always come to us. We can provide it in a standardized form. And it speeds things up enormously because as a practitioner, I get to comment on planning applications on the coast and they will come along. And individually, we get quite a lot of individual planning applications for extensions or whatever. Now we've got that information at our fingertips. We can say within this zone, it might be a coastal management area, but if it's not within this particular patch, I'm hoping over time, my planning colleagues will be able to look at that and think, oh, that's that location. So the same should apply to all the properties in that particular band of erosion. And it's really efficient and quicker, and it saves us time and money rather than doing individual planning applications over and over and over, providing the same information each time. It's out there. And the key is it's the best data we've got based on the Strategic Coastal Monitoring Programme, which runs around the whole country, collecting this data. We've got over 10 years worth of very detailed quality data now. So the predictions that we're making are much more evidence-based. So the evidence drives this product, and this product can inform the public and anybody making planning applications. We do have issues with it, obviously, because this is best available data now. And in my own council, we'll get central government funding for regeneration type projects where the design life of the proposal might be 30 years and we're looking 100 years ahead. So you're always going to get that slight difference between what we might call in local government forward planners, where we're looking beyond their 20, 30, 40-year horizon, and we're providing that information. And I'm hoping over time that that will work its way through as well. Are all the proposals that are coming forward, they might be okay the next few decades, but in the longer term, we really need to step back and start thinking about how we're going. So I'm not unbiased. I did work on both of these products, but I think from a practitioner's level, they're efficient, they're saving us money, and they're great information that we can impart to anybody. And we've had media inquiries on my own North Yorkshire, nice shot there of the North Yorkshire coastline. The media do look at it. We've had a few issues where we're potentially going to lose properties on the North Yorkshire coastline. The BBC have looked at these products. They understand it. So the questions we're being asked are very different. So you do need to refer back to this when the media come onto you, because they've got the lessons learned from these products, and they will ask, you know, you're predicting X, Y, Z, and you need the backing auditable trail to substantiate what you're saying, because this does impact lives. It was quite surprising the low level of inquiries I fully expected on the coastline where there's properties at risk. The original NCERM product had a line, and now we're making these bands going back. If I lived there, I do live on the coast in Scarborough, but I don't live exactly on the coast. If I lived there, I would have been very interested. I would have drilled down right down to my house, and all these products, you've got the best case scenario really and the worst case. Everybody goes to the worst case. They want to know how far back the coast is going to go. And if you're within that zone, I would be asking what you're going to do about it. Well, what you're going to do about it is the SMP. So the two products do work together very nicely. So you can go to the SMP and say, well, I'm at risk. What's the proposal here? Look at the action plan. Oh, there's a predicted to make a capital investment in the future. Great. Or it's a really effectively a do-nothing coastline. It's going to be monitored over the future. And I think I might leave it there, Rachel, if I'm handing back over to you. But I fully support them, and I'd like to thank the Environment Agency as well for bringing these products forward, because they're making local government lives, officers' lives and elected members, I think, much easier. Thank you. Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Stuart. That's it. That's really, really nice of you to say, and also really helpful from your experience, like on the ground, so to speak. So yeah, thanks for coming along and speaking today to everybody. So the last bit that you will hear from me is regarding the information to assist you in your roles and where to find that. Next slide, please, and some of the next steps regarding some of the communications and engagement regarding SMPs and NCERM and where we're looking to go forward with them. So obviously, Stuart gave you some detail regarding where he's spoken to his elected members in his area. Also, we've got the main resource that you can see on screen here on the Coastal Handbook. So on the Coastal Handbook, we have 4 products which we've called an elected members pack. As you can see on screen there, the 4 titles of them. So these are either specific to the detailing question. So you've got one specifically regarding SMPs, one regarding NCERM, one how we work together to manage the coast, and the longest one on there is the supporting communities living within a changing coast. I think that one's about 10 pages long. In each of these documents, it lists exactly what is in there. So what is an SMP, what is SMP Explorer, etc. And then what you can do in your role and how, as an elected member, you can use this information in your role and how that can support you. How to get this information. So as I say, this is hosted on our Coastal Handbook. You can either request the information directly from us via emailing us. We'll put the email of where to get that at the end. We'll also put it into the chat and put it into Slido, so you've got that. The other way is going directly onto the Coast Handbook and requesting access there, but it'd be quicker if you just come to us. In fact, you can see the email address on the screen there, the Coastal Resilience email address. Email us for access and we can provide that, or you can speak to your local environment agency colleagues, and they'd be able to pass the documents to you as well. These are all PDF documents, so yeah, they're easily transferable. So that is the main resource available, digitized resource. Obviously, you've got the information that you've heard today, and if there is anything else, you've got our email address for our team on there if you need any more information. Obviously, speak to your local EA colleagues as well. Next slide, please. And I think this is regarding, how to use information in your role. So using that detail there, obviously having the conversations with local EA colleagues as well. The main detail in here to support you in your conversations in your area and support you in that understanding of how to use the information regarding the conversations that you'll have and the questions that you'll get asked in your area. Also, to highlight SMP Explorer itself and to make yourself familiar with that, have a play around on there, go to your area, see what actually the management approach is and any of the actions that are working towards the management approaches that are detailed on SMP Explorer. Also, you've got that visual representation to aid you in that understanding of the coastal risk, and obviously with the NCERM, if that is a risk factor in your area. The final point on there, encourage you to use that risk information and SMP Explorer and those documents, the elected members pack, with colleagues in your local authority. As Stuart said, speak to those as well. If they're not familiar, pass the information back up as well. But yeah, do ask if you're having issues getting the information direct, come to us or speak to your colleagues in your local authority. Next slide, please. And I think this is the last one from myself. So what's next? So obviously we're running this coastal webinar series. This is the second one of these. We've got one tomorrow, which is a bit more in depth. That's on tools and training of SMP Explorer, how that will be used in planning decisions, and how to be used in local plan and CCMA designation and updates, coastal change management areas. We're also working with the TCPA on an e-learning module that will sit on the TCPA website. The date of that is still to be confirmed. Obviously, I spoke about the SMP Next Steps Refresh into Action project. And again, the Coastal Handbook. If you do get on there, obviously, to get that elected members pack, and you do want to have a look around there, it is a continuous update because it's a digital tool to host all the information and guidance documents. So if you do have any feedback, we welcome that, and please do let us know if you've got any other resource that you'd like to see on there to sit alongside some of the information that we do have sitting on there at the moment. But yes, continuous updates when you're looking for feedback on there. And I think that's it from myself. And I think we're moving into the Q&A section now. So yeah, back to you, Celia. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks so much, Rachel, Stuart, Eleanor, and all the other presenters. Nick had to leave early, so he's not able to answer questions, but we're in good hands with the colleagues from the Environment Agency and Stuart to answer your questions. So turning to that, the first question, I'm actually going to split into two parts because I think it touches on this issue around roles and responsibilities. The question is, who is responsible for the delivery of SMP policies on the ground? Is it the landowner or coastal protection authorities? But I think that does touch on this issue that coastal environments are quite complex. The land can be owned by different people. There might be different infrastructure assets. So I think I'm going to ask you two questions. One is, who ultimately is responsible for delivery of the policies, but also can you say a bit about the way that partnership working happens around shoreline management plans and how you engage with stakeholders?
Sorry, coming off mute there. Yeah, so yeah, I'll take this one. So yeah, that first part regarding the actual policy or the management intent first of all. So they're implemented on the ground through various mechanisms, whether that's a scheme or a local planning decision, you know, depending on what it is. If it's obviously a hold the line policy, we're looking at a coastal defence scheme there. The actions to actually work towards those policies and actually getting them off the ground or updated or changed if that's a change that's needed in there, that will be taken by the lead authority, and all those actions will be highlighted on, just a plug for SMP Explorer again, all the lead authority and the actions against those will be highlighted on there, and who is actually at the lead at that time. It potentially would change depending on what it is. You know, it could be a project, it could be a capital scheme, a project to inform the actual scheme that needs to be taken and obviously get off the ground. So again, it's not just one authority that's actually, you know, starting from the bottom, working out the way up. Obviously, there's a coastal group involved, SMP groups, and then you've got right to the top the assurance role regarding the EA. So yeah, again, partnership working is key for SMPs. We wouldn't, you know, just direct at one authority. Everyone's got their own individual roles within obviously the implementation and guidance and getting the detail in the schemes and the actual doing the do off the ground. So yeah, again, I think Nick said at the start of the call, partnership working is really key in this area, and I think anything coastal is really key.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rachel. I'm going to combine a couple of the questions into one, because one, I think, was a point of clarification that you did cover in your presentation, which is just about, you know, accessing policies and whether that SMP policies are being up to date. And there's also a question about monitoring. So if I merge those into a question, which is what's the kind of process for refreshing SMP policies, and how does the coastal monitoring programme play into that process?
Yeah, so I'll take the latter one first. Obviously, got the coastal monitoring programme, which does provide a lot of the detail, obviously, for, you know, annually, obviously for what we're doing, what we're looking to change, any updates that are needed. We take that. It's essentially what it is on the tin, monitor information. So we obviously taking that on board. The actual process for changing policy. So obviously we're in the medium time frame now, and there is some policies that need to be changed. I don't know whether you saw on screen on one of the slides regarding the SMP refresh. A big part of that was the health checks for the SMPs. So this was a health check that looked at the SMPs across the board, highlighted where some policies needed to be changed. Either that was in the previous timeframe or now, or looking towards the future. So that is what we're obviously working towards within the Next Steps project as well, actually getting that detail in those ones that need more of an immediate change off the ground. I think there was 103 locations that were highlighted, and that was, you know, potentially more. Obviously, we've moved on since obviously the health checks were done between 2017 and 2021. So taking all that information, we're working towards that. So the process for change is not an immediate one. It might need a lot of information to actually get there, and obviously the funding around the policy change if needed. If it is just a project that needs to be informed or a strategy that needs to inform that change, then obviously that'll be a measure that will be highlighted in the actions. And again, the actions will list out where appropriate any actions that need to be worked towards to get that management approach changed or updated. But yeah, that's what we're working towards now. Any immediate changes that have been done or will be done regarding the SMPs, they are an immediate change that you would expect to see on SMP Explorer. We are in the process of yearly updates of the SMP, so that'll just be the actions and any wording that needs to be changed. That is on a yearly basis, but any changes to management policies, management intents themselves will be more immediate. Again, it's something that will be could be done quickly, depending on the style of change, or it would be something further down the line. And also it might be something that would need a interim management measure. So if it's something like a trigger that's informing that, maybe a hold the line policy to a manager realignment, something as an intermediate measure to actually, buy the time to get to that place where we need to be. Hopefully that makes sense. There's a bit of convoluted way around it, but
yeah. Great, thanks, Rachel. There's a couple of questions. Obviously, the audience today is elected members, so they'll a lot of them will have understanding of particular schemes or things that are happening in their patch that they represent. Now, I'm conscious that our panel here are kind of more Environment Agency national teams, so that you might not be able to comment on specific locations. But I wondered if it would just be helpful just to outline the role that the Environment Agency plays in a regional basis. So if there was a particular tidal scheme being proposed, or if there was a particular kind of habitat on a coastal area, what's the Environment Agency's ongoing role in terms of managing that coastal change and working with local stakeholders?
Yeah, so I mean, myself, I was in a local area team in the Sustainable Places team in Yorkshire. So that kind of team would have a role on the ground dealing with the local planning applications or anything like that. Obviously, you've got the local teams regarding that work on the habitat side, the flood risk side, and any scheme. So they're your kind of local teams that would work on the ground and also provide that information that you would see within the SMPs, and that obviously be driven up to a national level. So they're the type of the local teams and that are dealing with any schemes in your area. They're the people that you would be needing to speak to if there's any on the ground in-depth information, or you can direct it to the national comms and engagement mailbox, and that will be directed to whichever team is dealing with anything information that you're needing to know within your area.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rachel. I'm conscious of time, and I think we have another poll to run before we close. So I think the questions in Slido also have been given some written responses, which I hope people will find useful. And there's now we can add into the chat some useful links for attendees to follow up. So I will make sure that's copied into the chat for everybody and hand over to Eleanor to go through the second poll.
Yeah, thanks, Celia. Thanks, everyone. Some really great questions. So we will look at popping an answer to, and I realise there's a couple that maybe we haven't come to. So keep an eye on that, because we will look to put a bit of a response to some of those on there over the next few hours. So thank you very much. I never get bored of hearing Rach and Stuart talk about this stuff, to be honest. It's really interesting, and I'm glad you found it useful. Thanks for also bearing with Slido. We really appreciate you popping your questions on there, and I can see that we've got a few votes in for the last poll. So the last poll that we're just running for now is around what you're going to do next. So after this webinar, are you now going to look at SMPs and NCERM online to support you in your role? So I'm hoping we've provided some information for you that has made you interested and want to go and learn a bit more. As you can see in the chat as well, hopefully in the Zoom chat, we've provided some links. So you have got, you can click away and to find a bit more out about Shoreline Management Plans, view Shoreline Management Plan Explorer, look at our coastal erosion risk information on Shoreline Management Explorer. And also, I know we've mentioned the National Monitoring Programme as well. So we've popped that link in there as well. So great to see that we've got a load of you wanting to go and find out more. That's brilliant. Thank you. And hopefully we can persuade the maybe that's in there to go and have a look. But thank you for looking at Slido, getting involved in the Q&A, and I hope you found it useful. And I'll pass over to Celia to finish.
Great, thanks so much, Eleanor. And yeah, I really couldn't commend these resources enough. So not only the SMP Explorer, which is a really user-friendly tool to find local information, but also some of the other resources such as the Coastal Handbook and the resources aimed at local elected members. I really hope that you will take advantage of and access those. As I said, we will make the recording of this webinar available. So if you think that this information would be useful to your colleagues, then we will share a link, and please do cascade that around relevant councillors that you work with in your authorities. And just to kind of finally say that, you know, this is all challenging and it's really complex, but this information and the resources are out there to help you in coastal authorities, and working in partnership, I think, has been a really key message from the presentations today. And you, as elected members, have a really key role as stakeholders on the coast in being part of that partnership. So it's a really important role that you play, and thank you so much for taking the time to come along to the webinar today. And thanks once again to our excellent presenters for sharing this really helpful, useful information in such an accessible way. And we'll leave it there. Thanks so much, everyone. Goodbye.